Natalie never imagined the night she got engaged would become the quiet before a storm. It happened on a calm Friday evening in the small apartment she shared with Caleb, a place filled with mismatched furniture, thrift store lamps, and framed photos from road trips that meant more to them than luxury ever could. Caleb cooked dinner, his slightly overcooked but beloved chicken parmesan, and afterward, while the television murmured in the background, he grew unusually quiet. Natalie noticed immediately. Caleb wasn't a man who fidgeted or stalled. When he took her hand, his voice was steady but his fingers trembled just enough to give him away. "I don't want a future that doesn't include you," he said simply. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Natalie froze, breath caught in her chest, not from shock but from certainty. She had known this moment was coming, and she had known her answer long before he asked. Tears welled as she nodded, laughing softly through them. "Yes. Of course yes." When Caleb slipped the simple solitaire ring onto her finger, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. No grand speeches followed, no planning or logistics. They sat together on the couch, foreheads touching, stunned by the weight and joy of the promise they had just made. Natalie went to bed that night staring at the ring, feeling like her life had finally, unmistakably begun. "Before I continue, I need to ask you for a favor. We're working toward our first 1,000 subscribers, and your support truly makes a difference. If you haven't already, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. That single click helps keep this channel growing and allows me to keep bringing you stories like this." The next morning, Natalie called her mother. She was practically vibrating with excitement, pacing the kitchen as the phone rang. Deborah answered on the third ring, her tone sharp, as if inconvenience came standard. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Natalie smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. "Better than all right. Kayla proposed last night. We're getting married." There was a pause, too long, too heavy. Then Deborah exhaled slowly, the kind of sigh that always carried judgment. "Oh, Natalie," she said. "You know Kayla isn't going to handle this well." The words landed like a slap. Natalie stopped pacing. "What? Mom, did you hear me? I'm engaged." Deborah hesitated. "Of course I'm happy for you. But Kayla's still single. She's fragile right now. This will hurt her." Natalie felt her excitement drain, replaced by a familiar ache. Somehow, even now, her happiness had already been redirected toward her sister's feelings. "So what are you saying?" Natalie asked carefully. Deborah didn't answer directly. She didn't have to. The implication hung heavy between them. By the time the call ended, Natalie was staring at the ring on her finger, its sparkle dulled by an old realization resurfacing. Even on the best day of her life, she was expected to step aside. Kayla had always been the center of gravity in Deborah's world. She was Natalie's half-sister, born a year after Deborah married Stephen. And from the beginning, Kayla's emotions set the household's temperature. Where Natalie was quiet and observant, Kayla was loud, expressive, and endlessly demanding. Deborah responded accordingly. Natalie learned early that achievement didn't earn attention the way crisis did. At 7, she brought home a certificate for perfect attendance and left it proudly on the kitchen table. Before Deborah could glance at it, Kayla burst in sobbing over a playground slight, and the paper slid unnoticed to the floor. That pattern repeated itself year after year. Natalie's birthdays were shared so Kayla wouldn't feel left out. Her academic honors were acknowledged politely, while Kayla's minor milestones were celebrated as triumphs. By adulthood, Natalie had stopped competing for approval she knew she wouldn't receive. She built a life anyway, earned a scholarship, became an elementary school teacher, and found in Caleb the first person who treated her joy as something worth protecting. That was why Deborah's reaction stung so deeply. It wasn't new. It was confirmation. 3 weeks after Natalie and Caleb announced their engagement publicly, Deborah invited the family to dinner. Natalie arrived hopeful despite herself, wondering if time had softened the initial response. Instead, Kayla seized the floor before dessert. She stood, clinked a spoon against her glass, and smiled like she was unveiling a prize. "I'm engaged," she announced. Natalie's fork slipped from her hand. Kayla flashed a ring, cheap, oversized, unmistakably rushed. "Tyler proposed last night. We're getting married in March." Deborah gasped, tears springing instantly. She rushed to Kayla's side, praising fate and true love. Kayla's eyes flicked toward Natalie, sharp and assessing. "Isn't it funny?" she said lightly. "2 sisters, 2 weddings." Natalie forced a smile and offered congratulations, but the tension was unmistakable. Throughout the evening, Kayla basked in attention, painting her whirlwind romance as destiny. Natalie said little, sensing instinctively that this wasn't about love. It was about not being left behind. Kayla's wedding came together in chaos. Vendors were booked impulsively, money was spent recklessly, and arguments followed nearly every decision. Deborah defended every choice, framing stress as passion. Natalie attended quietly, observing how Kayla's eyes kept drifting toward her during the ceremony, searching for reaction, comparison, validation. 2 months after the honeymoon, the marriage imploded. Tyler was caught cheating, and the fallout was swift and public. When Kayla called Natalie in tears, Natalie listened, offered sympathy, and meant it. But the conversation twisted quickly. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't gotten engaged first," Kayla snapped. "You made me rush." Natalie sat stunned, realizing something fundamental had shifted. Kayla wasn't just grieving, she was assigning blame. And as rumors began to circulate, carried by whispers and family phone calls, Natalie felt the ground beneath her happiness start to crack. What had begun as a proposal rooted in love was slowly being transformed into a battlefield she had never agreed to fight on. After Kayla's divorce became public, the family narrative shifted almost overnight. Sympathy gathered around her like a shield, and Natalie felt it closing in. At church gatherings and birthday dinners, relatives spoke in hushed voices about heartbreak and healing, always glancing toward Kayla as if she might shatter. Natalie tried to stay quiet, but even silence was interpreted as cruelty. One afternoon, Deborah called and launched straight into it. "Kayla's having a really hard time," she said. "She saw your wedding venue online." It set her back. Natalie gripped the phone. "Mom, I didn't post anything." Deborah sighed. "Still, maybe you could slow things down. Be considerate." Natalie felt the familiar tug of guilt, but this time it tangled with anger. She wasn't flaunting anything. She was simply moving forward. Yet somehow, her progress was being framed as an attack. That night, she told Caleb everything. He listened quietly, jaw tight, then said, "You're allowed to be happy without permission." Natalie wanted to believe him, but years of conditioning made that harder than it should have been. Thanksgiving was the breaking point. Deborah hosted, insisting it would be good for everyone. Natalie arrived with Caleb, determined to keep the peace. For most of the evening, Kayla sulked in silence, nursing a glass of wine and glaring whenever Natalie laughed. Then, as dessert was being cleared, Natalie overheard Kayla whisper sharply to Deborah and 2 aunts in the kitchen. "If she really loved me," Kayla hissed, "she'd cancel the wedding." Deborah murmured something soothing, rubbing Kayla's back. Natalie stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding. Cancel her wedding. Not postpone, not compromise, erase. She slipped away before they noticed her, handshaking. For the first time, the truth was undeniable. Kayla didn't just want comfort. She wanted control. And Deborah was willing to give it to her. 2 days later, Deborah called with a plan already formed. "What if you scaled it down?" she suggested gently. "A small ceremony. Nothing flashy." "Kayla isn't ready to watch you celebrate." Natalie felt something snap. "My wedding isn't about Kayla," she said firmly. Deborah bristled. "Family should come first." Natalie's voice shook, but she didn't back down. "I've spent my whole life putting family first. This time, I'm choosing myself." The line went quiet. When the call ended, Natalie collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. Caleb sat beside her, taking her hands. "They are trying to wear you down," he said. "You don't owe them sacrifice to prove love." Natalie nodded slowly. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider a possibility that once felt unthinkable, that protecting her future might mean disappointing her past. Kayla escalated when guilt failed. Texts arrived late at night, dripping with accusation. "Must be nice to have a perfect life. January feels intentional." Natalie ignored them. Then the voicemails started, tearful, rambling, theatrical. "I can't heal while you're rubbing this in my face," Kayla sobbed. Deborah followed with her own calls, repeating the same refrain. Natalie stopped answering. The silence was both terrifying and freeing. At a small family dinner hosted by a relative, Kayla finally exploded in public, accusing Natalie of being selfish and cold. Natalie stood, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My life choices aren't an attack on you," she said. Gasps filled the room. Kayla's tears vanished, replaced by fury. Natalie left with Caleb, heart racing, knowing there was no going back now. The morning after that dinner, Deborah sent a single text, "You owe your sister an apology." Natalie stared at it for a long time. Then she did something she had never done before. She didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and began drafting an email. Clear, calm, final. She explained the boundaries being crossed, the pressure, the manipulation. With Caleb beside her, she made the decision that would change everything. Deborah and Kayla would no longer be welcome at the wedding. When Natalie hit send, fear surged through her, then relief, sharp and undeniable. Within hours, the backlash began. Angry messages, accusations, relatives taking sides. But beneath the noise, Natalie felt something new taking root. For the first time, she wasn't shrinking. She was standing still. And whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. The war had been declared, but she was no longer fighting it alone. The messages to Caleb started quietly, the way most damage does. One evening, as he and Natalie reviewed seating charts at the kitchen table, Caleb's phone lit up. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and turned it toward her. "Hey. I know things are weird right now. I just need someone safe to talk to." It was from Kayla. Natalie felt a chill crawl up her spine. Kayla had never contacted Caleb directly before. He didn't reply. They both agreed it was another attempt to provoke attention. But the next night, another message came. "You've always been kind to me. Even when Natalie isn't." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's not an accident," he said flatly. Natalie nodded, anger replacing unease. They began saving screenshots, not out of paranoia, but instinct. By the end of the week, Kayla's messages shifted from wounded to inappropriate. "I feel like we understand each other. I can't stop thinking about you." Caleb showed Natalie immediately, disgust written across his face. Kayla hadn't just crossed a boundary. She'd torched it. Natalie didn't cry this time. She didn't freeze or spiral. She acted. That night, she drafted another email. Shorter, sharper, impossible to twist. She sent it to Deborah and several relatives. Attached were the screenshots. "This is why Kayla is no longer welcome in my life or at my wedding." The responses came fast. Judith called first. "I'm not shocked," she said calmly. "I'm relieved you finally stopped protecting her lies." Samantha followed with a text filled with disbelief and support. But Deborah's reply was predictably defensive. She claimed Kayla was confused, emotional, misinterpreted. Natalie closed the laptop without answering. For the first time, she understood something clearly. Deborah wasn't neutral. She was complicit. And that realization hurt far more than Kayla's betrayal ever could. With 2 weeks left before the wedding, Natalie shifted into protection mode. She and Caleb met with the venue coordinator and spoke plainly. "My mother and sister are not invited," Natalie said. "If they show up, they are to be removed." There was no hesitation in her voice. Security was hired. Photos were provided. Boundaries were documented. Walking out of the meeting, Natalie felt steady, not angry, not vengeful, just resolved. Kayla's rumors continued to circulate, growing more absurd by the day. Some relatives believed them. Others didn't. Natalie stopped tracking who was who. She was done defending herself to people invested in misunderstanding her. At night, she slept better than she had in months. Peace, she was learning, often arrived disguised as loss. The wedding morning was bright and cold, sunlight cutting through frost like glass. In the bridal suite, Natalie felt calm in a way that surprised her. Allison adjusted her veil, smiling. "You're really okay," she said. Natalie nodded. She was. When she saw Caleb during their first look, the noise of the past months vanished completely. He smiled, eyes wet, and said, "We made it." For a moment, it felt like nothing could touch them. Then Allison burst back into the room, breathless. "They're here," she said quietly. Natalie closed her eyes. Security had stopped Deborah and Kayla at the gate, but they were causing a scene. Deborah crying. Kayla screaming. Natalie's pulse spiked, but she didn't move. "Let security handle it," she said evenly. "I'm not giving them this." And she meant it. When Natalie walked down the aisle moments later, she didn't look back. Judith walked beside her, proud and steady. Caleb waited at the altar, unwavering. The ceremony unfolded flawlessly, vows spoken with conviction, rings exchanged without interruption. Whatever chaos echoed outside the gates never breached the space they had claimed.
Applause rose, warm and real.
Natalie exhaled as if releasing a lifetime of tension.
She was married. She was free.
And though she didn't yet know what Kayla would attempt next, one truth settled firmly in her chest. Whatever came, it would not take this from her. This chapter, this joy, was hers alone. The reception unfolded like a reward earned through fire. Music filled the room, laughter rose easily, and Natalie found herself smiling without effort for the first time in months. She danced with Caleb, forehead pressed to his, grounding herself in the simple truth that they were finally here. Friends toasted them with warmth and sincerity. Judith hugged Natalie tightly and whispered, "You were brave today."
Natalie believed her. The past felt distant, muted by joy. Then Samantha appeared beside her, face pale.
"I need to tell you something before you hear it from someone else," she said quietly.
Natalie's stomach tightened. Samantha leaned in.
"Kayla tried to come back during the reception."
Natalie stiffened. She changed into a wedding dress. She said it was symbolic.
Natalie stared at her, stunned, not angry, not shocked, just hollow. Security had stopped Kayla before she reached the doors.
Guests barely noticed. Still, the image lingered.
Kayla, desperate enough to mimic what she couldn't destroy.
Natalie didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't leave the room. Instead, she lifted her chin and returned to the dance floor.
That choice mattered more than any confrontation ever could. Kayla's final stunt was not about love or grief, it was about being seen.
And Natalie refused to grant that wish.
The night continued, unbroken. When the final song played and guests began to drift away, Natalie felt something settle inside her. The wedding hadn't just survived the chaos.
It had transcended it.
Kayla's noise had become background static, irrelevant and small. Natalie went to sleep that night beside her husband with a quiet certainty she had never known before.
The fallout arrived the next morning.
Messages flooded in, some apologetic, some accusatory, some embarrassingly late in their support. Deborah sent a long email filled with wounded language and self-pity. Kayla left voicemails alternating between rage and despair. Natalie listened to none of them.
She had learned the cost of engagement. Judith called instead.
"You don't need to fix this," she said firmly. "It was broken long before you stood up."
Samantha echoed the sentiment. "People saw who she is.
You don't have to explain anymore." And for the first time, Natalie believed that too. 3 days later, the final twist arrived through Samantha's voice. Kayla and Deborah had turned on each other. The alliance that had once felt immovable had collapsed under its own weight. Kayla accused Deborah of failing her, of letting Natalie win. Deborah, exhausted and shaken, finally snapped.
She told Kayla to leave the house. The news landed without triumph.
Natalie felt no victory, no satisfaction. Only distance.
Their implosion wasn't justice. It was inevitability. Dysfunction eventually consumes itself. Natalie had simply stepped out of its path. That evening, Natalie blocked both of them. Phone, email, social media. One deliberate decision at a time. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was spacious.
She noticed it the next morning over coffee, the absence of dread, the lack of tension. Caleb smiled at her across the table.
"You seem lighter," he said. Natalie nodded. She was. She hadn't lost a family. She had released an obligation.
Married life settled into something steady and real.
Weekend routines. Quiet laughter.
Shared responsibility. Natalie still carried memories, but they no longer defined her. When old guilt tried to surface, she recognized it for what it was, conditioning, not truth.
She had not abandoned anyone. She had simply stopped abandoning herself.
And that distinction changed everything. Months later, Judith said something that stayed with her.
"You didn't break the family," she said.
"You broke the pattern." Natalie understood then that healing didn't require reconciliation.
Sometimes it required distance.
Sometimes it required choosing peace over approval. The girl who once shared her birthday candles had grown into a woman who no longer dimmed her light for anyone. One evening, Natalie stood on the porch with Caleb, watching the sky soften into dusk. He took her hand, warm and familiar. "This is our family now," she said quietly. Caleb squeezed her fingers. "It always was." And in that moment, Natalie felt it fully, the clean ending she had fought for. Thank you for watching until the end. Stories like Natalie's remind us that love doesn't demand sacrifice of your peace, and family doesn't get a free pass to hurt you just because they share your blood. If this story made you feel something, anger, relief, understanding, you're not alone.
Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Natalie's place?
And if you enjoy real, emotional stories about standing up for yourself and choosing a healthier future, make sure you like this video and subscribe.
Your support helps this channel grow and brings more stories like this to you.